The detail that gives away your insecurity is usually not your fear. It is not your silence. It is not even your doubt. It is the small, almost invisible need to make other people see you a certain way. That is what most people miss. Insecurity does not always appear as weakness. Many times, it appears as effort. Extra effort. Unnecessary effort. The effort to explain too much, to defend too fast, to prove your value before anyone even questioned it. And that is why so many people do not notice it in themselves. They think insecurity looks like hiding. But often, insecurity looks like performing. That is a hard truth to hear, because most people spend years believing they are being careful, mature, or simply misunderstood, when in reality they are being led by fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being seen as less. Fear of being ignored. Fear of not being enough. And the strange part is this: the more a person is controlled by that fear, the more they try to fix how they appear from the outside, while the real fracture remains untouched inside. This is why so many people are exhausted. They are not tired from life alone. They are tired from constantly managing an image. You can feel this in ordinary moments. In the urge to justify a simple decision that needed no defense. In the pressure to say more just so nobody misunderstands you. In the discomfort of not being validated quickly. In the need to be recognized as smart, strong, calm, good, loyal, deep, different, valuable. None of these things are evil. They are human. But when they begin to control your behavior, they reveal something deeper. Your peace is depending too much on how you are received. And that dependence is one of the clearest signs of insecurity. Stoic wisdom has always pointed toward this, even without using modern language for it. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to one quiet truth. You lose yourself the moment you become too concerned with the minds of others. Not because other people do not matter, but because their opinions are unstable. They shift with mood, timing, ignorance, projection, envy, pain, and misunderstanding. If you build your sense of self on something that's unstable, your inner life will always shake. You will never rest. You will keep adjusting, keep correcting, keep performing, hoping that one more explanation, one more achievement, one more display of calm or strength will finally make you feel safe. But safety does not come from being understood by everyone. Safety comes from no longer needing everyone to understand you. That is the shift most people never make. Many people say they want confidence, but what they really want is a guarantee. A guarantee that they will be approved of, respected, admired, chosen, or at least not rejected. But confidence is not a guarantee. Confidence is the ability to remain steady even without one. It is the willingness to stand in your truth without chasing permission. And that is why real confidence is often quiet. It does not beg to be noticed. It does not panic when it is not immediately affirmed. It does not collapse every time someone disagrees. A lot of suffering begins the moment you hand your emotional balance to the eyes of other people. Because then everything becomes a test. A message becomes a test. A silence becomes a test. A delayed reply becomes a test. A facial expression becomes a test. A criticism becomes a wound. A disagreement becomes a threat. And little by little, life stops being life and starts becoming a constant interpretation of how you are being perceived. That is not peace. That is inner captivity. And the painful part is that most people live this way for so long that it starts to feel normal. They do not realize how many of their choices are shaped by fear of perception. They do not notice how often they abandon simplicity for image. They do not notice how quickly they rush to correct what was never truly broken. They do not notice how often they speak from tension instead of conviction. They do not notice that what hurts them most is not always what was said or done, but what it seemed to imply about their worth. That is why this detail is so revealing. Insecurity often shows up in the inability to let things be misunderstood for a moment. That sounds small, but it is not small at all. Because when you cannot tolerate being misunderstood, you begin to overmanage every interaction. You explain beyond what is needed. You defend things that do not need defense. You chase closure from people who cannot give it. You try to leave no room for misinterpretation, because deep down, misinterpretation feels dangerous to you. It feels personal. It feels like exposure. It feels like losing control. But here is the deeper truth. The need to control perception is itself a confession of inner instability. A person who is rooted does not need to control every impression. A person who is rooted understands that being seen wrongly by some people is part of life. A person who is rooted knows that peace is more valuable than perfect presentation. And this is where so much emotional maturity begins. Not in learning how to impress more skillfully, but in learning how to stop trembling in front of other people's incomplete opinions. Seneca warned, in his own way, against the trap of public judgment. He understood that the crowd is not a safe place to store your self-worth. The crowd can praise you today and dismiss you tomorrow. The crowd can misread your silence and misread your speech. It can celebrate what is shallow and overlook what is real. If your spirit depends on that, then your spirit will remain fragile. It will always be waiting for another signal, another reaction, another confirmation. And that is why some people look composed on the outside while still feeling constantly threatened inside. Because insecurity is not always loud. Sometimes it is polished. Sometimes it is disciplined. Sometimes it even looks impressive. But beneath that surface, there is still a restless hunger. Please see me correctly. Please recognize what I am. Please do not reduce me. Please do not overlook me. And that hunger leaks into tone, posture, reactions, speed, intensity, and the way a person tries to control the room without realizing it. If this reflection is reaching something real inside you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Not to interrupt this silence, but to help this message reach someone else who may also be tired of living at the mercy of other people's eyes. The hardest part is that insecurity can disguise itself as self-awareness. You may think you are simply being thoughtful. You may think you are just trying to communicate clearly. You may think you are protecting your image because that is what responsible people do. And yes, sometimes clarity matters. Sometimes explanation matters. Sometimes defense is necessary. But insecurity has a different energy. It carries urgency. It carries emotional heat. It carries a hidden desperation to fix how you are being seen. That desperation is the clue. When your inner world is stable, you do not rush so much. You do not feel forced to correct every impression. You do not chase understanding from those who are committed to misunderstanding you. You do not turn every social friction into a crisis of identity. You begin to conserve your energy. You become more selective, more still, more grounded. And from the outside, this may even look like distance. But it is not distance. It is self-possession. Epictetus taught something simple and liberating. There are things within your control, and there are things outside it. Most insecurity grows from trying to control what was never yours. The minds of others are not yours. Their assumptions are not yours. Their projections are not yours. Their approval is not yours. Once you forget that, you begin fighting endless invisible battles. Once you remember it, a different kind of freedom begins. You stop trying to win every silent trial. You stop trying to edit yourself into universal acceptance. You stop believing that one wrong perception can define you. And slowly, you return to yourself. This does not mean becoming cold. It does not mean pretending not to care. It means caring from strength instead of dependence. It means speaking because you mean it, not because you are panicking. It means being clear without begging. It means being kind without shrinking. It means allowing some people to leave with the wrong version of you, and still sleeping in peace. That is rare strength. Not the strength that dominates a room. Not the strength that always has the last word. Not the strength that is admired from a distance. The strength that remains calm when it is not perfectly seen. Most people do not notice that their insecurity lives in these tiny moments. In the extra sentence. In the forced explanation. In the need to smooth every edge. In the discomfort of unresolved perception. In the hidden belief that if others do not see you the right way, something inside you becomes less real. But what is real does not become unreal because someone failed to recognize it. And maybe that is the first piece you need to recover. Your worth does not increase when it is noticed. Your truth does not become truth only when it is agreed with. Your calm does not need an audience to be valid. The moment you truly understand that, something begins to soften. You stop chasing mirrors. You stop running after reassurance. You stop leaking your energy into places where it can never return whole. And in that silence, you begin to see that the real work was never to perfect the image. It was to stabilize the soul behind it. If some part of this reflection touched something you have been carrying in silence, write one word in the comments that describes what you felt while hearing this. Sometimes one honest word says more than a long explanation ever could. And maybe that is exactly the lesson. The less secure the mind is, the more it tries to prove. The more secure the mind becomes, the less it needs to announce itself. What makes this pattern so difficult to notice is that it rarely begins in the present moment. It begins much deeper. It begins in the memory of what it felt like to be dismissed, overlooked, corrected too harshly, compared too often, or loved too conditionally. A person does not wake up one day and decide to become dependent on perception. That dependence is usually built slowly, through repetition. Through emotional experiences that taught the mind a dangerous lesson. If you are not seen the right way, you are not safe. And once the mind learns that lesson, it carries it everywhere. It carries it into conversations, into relationships, into work, into family, into silence, into ambition, into every place where the self might be evaluated. That is why insecurity is not just a surface issue. It is not just low self-esteem, or shyness, or fear. It is often a form of inner hypervigilance. A constant scanning. A subtle emotional readiness for rejection, disrespect, misunderstanding, or exclusion. Even when nothing dramatic is happening, the mind remains alert. It keeps watching. It keeps measuring. It keeps asking, how am I being received right now? Did that sound wrong? Did I look weak? Did I lose value in that moment? This is exhausting because the person is not only living life. They are monitoring themselves living it. And the more self-monitoring grows, the less natural a person becomes. They begin to edit their spontaneity. They begin to doubt their instincts. They begin to rehearse things in their head before speaking. They begin to replay moments after they end. They begin to confuse control with safety. But control is a false form of safety. It feels useful at first because it gives the illusion of protection. If you say the perfect thing, maybe nobody can judge you. If you explain enough, maybe nobody can misread you. If you stay impressive enough, maybe nobody can reduce you. If you appear composed enough, maybe nobody can detect your fear. But this strategy never truly works, because the outside world is too unpredictable. People will still misunderstand. They will still project. They will still assume. They will still miss the truth about you. And every time that happens, the insecure mind feels betrayed, because it secretly believed that enough effort should have guaranteed a better outcome. That belief is where a great deal of suffering hides. The Stoics understood that suffering becomes heavier when desire is attached to what cannot be commanded. Not every desire is loud. Some desires are silent. The desire to be seen fairly. The desire to be interpreted kindly. The desire to be respected without question. These seem reasonable, and in human terms they are. But when peace becomes attached to them, they become dangerous. Because then your inner state rises and falls according to forces you do not govern. And that is how insecurity keeps feeding itself. You seek control because you feel unstable. Then you fail to control perception completely, because nobody can. then that failure makes you feel even more unstable. So you try harder next time. You explain more. You anticipate more. You overthink more. You perform more. And slowly, the habit becomes identity. You begin to say, "This is just how I am." But that is not how you are. That is how you adapted. There is a difference. And seeing that difference matters, because what was learned can also be unlearned. Not instantly. Not perfectly. But steadily. The first shift is internal honesty. You have to begin catching the moment beneath the moment. Not just what you are doing, but why you are doing it. Not just the explanation, but the fear behind the explanation. Not just the reaction, but the wound behind the reaction. Because many people try to change behavior without understanding the emotional bargain they are making. They tell themselves, "I need to stop over-explaining." But inside, another voice says, "If I do not explain, I may be judged." They say, "I need to stop caring what people think." But inside, another voice says, "If they think badly of me, I may lose connection, value, or respect." They say, "I need to be more confident." But inside, another voice says, "Confidence feels risky, because if I stop managing everything, I may be exposed." This is why simple advice often fails. Because the habit is protecting something. Even if it is hurting you, it still feels protective. It still feels like armor. And the mind does not easily release armor unless it learns that peace is safer than performance. That is where true inner work begins. You begin to pause before the extra explanation. You begin to notice the heat in your body when you feel misread. You begin to watch the impulse to correct every false impression. You begin to ask yourself, "Am I speaking from clarity right now, or from fear?" That question alone can change a life. Because clarity is calm. Fear is urgent. Clarity says what matters and lets it stand. Fear says more and more because it does not trust that enough is enough. This is why emotional discipline is so important. Not suppression. Not numbness. Discipline. The kind that allows you to feel the discomfort of being imperfectly seen without immediately rushing to erase it. The kind that lets misunderstanding exist for a moment without turning it into an emergency. The kind that helps you remain whole even when another person's view of you is incomplete. This is not easy. It feels unnatural at first. In the beginning, silence may feel like weakness. Restraint may feel like loss. Letting go may feel irresponsible. But many times, what feels unnatural is actually the beginning of healing. You are so used to reacting that non-reaction feels wrong. You are so used to proving that stillness feels dangerous. You are so used to managing perception that surrendering that management feels like losing protection. But maybe what you are losing is not protection. Maybe what you are losing is the prison. Epictetus would remind you that disturbance does not come only from events, but from the judgments attached to them. Someone misunderstands you. That is the event. Then comes the judgment. This is bad. This diminishes me. I need to fix it now. That judgment creates the storm. Without it, the misunderstanding may still be unpleasant, but it no longer owns your nervous system. It no longer drags your identity with it. It no longer becomes proof that something is wrong with you. This is the freedom of disciplined thought. Not pretending nothing hurts. Not pretending you are above emotion. But refusing to let every external impression define your internal reality. There is another layer to this that many people do not expect. Insecurity does not only weaken your peace. It weakens your presence. Because when you are constantly adjusting for approval, you are never fully in the moment. Part of you is always standing outside yourself, watching, calculating, editing. And that split makes your energy feel strained. People may not always know why, but they feel it. They feel when someone is too eager to be accepted. They feel when someone is trying too hard to seem unbothered. They feel when words are carrying the weight of hidden self-defense. And ironically, That is often the very detail that gives insecurity away. Not the flaw, not the fear, but the tension around both. A secure person is not someone who has no weakness. A secure person is someone who is no longer panicking about being human. That is a very different kind of strength. It means your mistakes do not turn into identity collapse. It means criticism does not instantly become humiliation. It means not every disagreement feels like rejection. It means your nervous system is no longer begging the world to confirm your worth every hour. And once that strength begins to grow, your life becomes simpler. You speak with less waste. You stop trying to be flawlessly understood. You let some things pass. You answer less from impulse and more from center. You stop volunteering unnecessary proof. You become less available to emotional bait. You become less afraid of silence. You begin to discover that calm is not emptiness. Calm is power without display. If this reflection is speaking directly to something you have lived, pause for a second, leave your like, and subscribe to the channel. Not as a routine gesture, but as a quiet way of saying that this kind of truth still matters in a noisy world. One of the deepest signs of healing is when you no longer feel the need to rescue your image every time reality brushes against it. That does not mean you become careless. It means you become anchored. There is a center in you that no longer moves every time someone fails to see you correctly. You begin to understand something Marcus Aurelius tried to practice again and again. The mind can return to itself. Again and again. No matter what happened outside. Return to yourself. That is the practice. When you feel misjudged, return. When you feel dismissed, return. When you feel the old urge to prove, return. When you feel the heat of shame, return. When you feel the ache of not being recognized, return. Not to ego. Not to pride. To inner steadiness. That steadiness is built in silence first. In restraint first. In awareness first. Before it changes your life outside, it changes the conversation within. You start saying to yourself, I do not need to answer everything. You start saying, not every opinion deserves access to my peace. You start saying, I can survive being misread. You start saying, I do not need to perform confidence. I need to practice honesty. And slowly, the self that once lived in reaction begins to breathe again. This is important, because many people think healing insecurity means becoming harder, more distant, more detached, more unreadable. But that is not healing. That is often just another costume. Real healing does not make you cold. It makes you less desperate. It makes your kindness cleaner, because it no longer needs repayment. It makes your silence calmer, because it no longer hides shame. It makes your honesty stronger, because it no longer asks for permission. You do not become less human. You become less controlled by fear. And that changes everything. Because once fear stops deciding how you present yourself, truth begins to have more room. Simplicity begins to have more room. Peace begins to have more room. You stop trying to force dignity through appearance, and you begin to live it from within. You stop trying to look unshaken, and you begin to actually become harder to shake. You stop hunting for signs that you matter, and you begin to live like someone who already knows it quietly. That quiet knowing is not arrogance. It is release. Release from the endless labor of self-demonstration. Release from the pressure to explain your existence. Release from the illusion that every room must validate you before you can feel whole. If some part of this touched a truth you have never been able to name, write in the comments, I choose peace. Sometimes a simple sentence can become a turning point the mind remembers when the old pattern returns. Because the old pattern will return. At least for a while. The urge to prove may still rise. The urge to defend may still rise. The urge to control how you are seen may still rise. But now you will begin to recognize it faster. And that recognition is already power. You will see that not every impulse deserves obedience. You will see that not every discomfort is a danger. You will see that being human in front of others is not failure. You will see that the detail exposing your insecurity was never just in your behavior. It was in the belief underneath it, the belief that your value could be shaken by someone else's limited view. And once that belief begins to weaken, something beautiful happens. You stop standing before the world like someone waiting to be measured. You start standing like someone who has finally come home to himself. There comes a moment in real inner growth when you stop asking, "How do I make people see me differently?" and start asking, "Why have I given strangers, critics, and passing opinions so much authority over my inner state?" That question changes everything, because it stops the search from moving outward and forces it inward. And that is where freedom begins. Not when the world becomes fair. Not when people become deeper. Not when everyone finally understands your heart. Freedom begins when you realize that too much of your suffering has come from giving external things an internal throne. This is why the Stoic path feels both simple and difficult at the same time. Simple because the truth is clear. What belongs to you is your mind, your judgment, your response, your discipline, your values, your direction. What does not belong to you is reputation, interpretation, applause, rejection, projection, misunderstanding, and the endless movement of other people's opinions. Difficult because the ego hates that truth. The ego still wants control over what was never meant to be controlled. It still wants certainty where life only offers probability. It still wants emotional guarantees from a world that cannot provide them. And that is why insecurity survives for so long. Not because the person is weak, but because the ego keeps making secret deals. I will be at peace when they finally respect me. I will relax when nobody doubts me. I will feel secure when I stop being misunderstood. But none of those are real peace. They are delayed peace, conditional peace, fragile peace, peace that depends on behavior outside your command. And anything that depends on that will always be unstable. True peace begins at the moment you stop negotiating your worth with the outside world. That does not mean you stop caring about truth. It means you stop begging for confirmation. That does not mean you become indifferent to people. It means you stop depending on their reactions to feel whole. That does not mean you stop correcting something when correction is needed. It means you stop correcting everything just because your ego feels uncomfortable. There is a big difference. A person with inner steadiness is not passive. A person with inner steadiness is selective. Selective with words. Selective with energy. Selective with what deserves response. Selective with what deserves silence. And silence, when it comes from inner order, is not surrender. It is command. This is something many people misunderstand. They think strength is always visible. They think it must look like decisive speech, immediate reaction, strong posture, impressive certainty. But some of the deepest strength in a human being is invisible. It is the strength to remain unmoved by what does not deserve entry into your soul. It is the strength to leave some things unanswered. It is the strength to let false opinions die from lack of your participation. It is the strength to feel the sting of misjudgment and still refuse to become smaller, louder, or more desperate because of it. That kind of strength is rare because it requires inner separation. You must separate your being from the image of your being. You must separate your actual worth from other people's temporary reading of it. You must separate your peace from the noise trying to buy space in your mind. Most people never fully do this. They live and die inside mirrors. They spend years adjusting themselves to avoid discomfort, not realizing that the discomfort was never the real enemy. The real enemy was dependence. Dependence on approval. Dependence on validation. Dependence on being interpreted in a flattering way. Dependence on being seen as admirable, composed, wise, strong, desirable, right. But the one who depends is always vulnerable. Because once dependence exists, fear follows. And where fear leads, performance soon appears. And where performance rules, peace disappears. That is why so much of maturity is subtraction. Less proving, less rushing, less defending, less explaining, less reacting, less living as though every moment is a test of your value, and more returning to what is yours, returning to what is stable, returning to the part of you that does not need to be announced to be real. Marcus Aurelius kept bringing himself back to that essential discipline. Do not let the outer world colonize your inner world. He knew that the mind becomes corrupted when it is too impressed by praise and too wounded by blame. He knew that dignity is not maintained by chasing image, but by staying loyal to your principles whether you are applauded or ignored. That loyalty is what many people are missing. They are loyal to appearance more than essence. Loyal to perception more than truth. Loyal to temporary comfort more than inner formation. And this creates a life that looks polished but feels unstable. Because no matter how skilled you become at managing an image, you will still feel anxiety if the soul underneath that image is not grounded. The outer self can become very sophisticated. It can learn the right tone, the right posture, the right language, the right personality for each room. But if the inner self is still waiting for permission to exist, none of that will bring rest. Rest only comes when you stop asking the world to certify your value. This is why one of the clearest signs of healing is simplicity. You start speaking more simply. You start moving more simply. You start responding more simply. You stop decorating your truth just to make it safer for others to receive. You stop overbuilding explanations because you are no longer trying to protect a fragile self-image. You stop carrying every interaction like it could define your identity. And with that simplicity comes something beautiful. Space. Space between feeling and reaction. Space between judgment and belief. Space between what happens and what you choose to make it mean. That space is where freedom lives. Before that space, life feels automatic. Someone doubts you, and you tense. Someone ignores you, and you shrink. Someone criticizes you, and you begin defending in your head before they even finish. Someone misunderstands you, and the old fire rises immediately. But once that space begins to grow, you no longer live as a prisoner of first impulses. You can notice the pain without becoming it. You can feel the urge without obeying it. You can witness the old insecurity without kneeling to it. That is discipline. That is emotional adulthood. That is the quiet art of becoming harder to disturb. Seneca understood that the disturbed soul magnifies everything. A small insult becomes a major wound. A passing slight becomes a lasting burden. A simple disagreement becomes an assault on identity. But the disciplined soul does something different. It reduces things to their proper size. It does not make every discomfort sacred. It does not glorify every reaction. It does not treat emotional agitation like proof of importance. And maybe that is one of the greatest lessons here. Not everything that hurts deserves to lead you. Not everything that touches your pride deserves your energy. Not everything that unsettles you deserves your response. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is let a moment remain small. Not because you are weak, because you are free enough not to feed it. That is what insecure people struggle with most. They feed too much. They feed comments, silences, looks, delays, judgments, imagined meanings, half-spoken things, and invisible tensions. The mind keeps chewing on them because it is still trying to protect a self-image that feels threatened. But the more you feed these things, the more power they gain. And the more power they gain, the smaller your inner world becomes. So healing also means starvation. Starving the impulse to prove. Starving the addiction to reassurance. Starving the fantasy that one perfect explanation will finally make you safe in the eyes of everyone. Starving the habit of turning every uncomfortable perception into a personal emergency. When you stop feeding those habits, they weaken. When they weaken, you begin to hear yourself more clearly. And when you hear yourself more clearly, the world loses some of its power to define you. That is not isolation. That is sobriety. A sober mind sees reality more cleanly. It sees that some people are shallow. Some are wounded. Some are projecting. Some are careless. Some are incapable of seeing you correctly because they do not even see themselves correctly. And once you truly understand that, you stop making every misunderstanding feel like a verdict. It is not always a verdict. Sometimes it is just limitation. Sometimes the other person does not have the depth. Sometimes they do not have the honesty. Sometimes they do not have the calm. Sometimes they do not have the willingness. And once you see that, you stop taking every poor interpretation as evidence that something is wrong with you. That is a form of mercy toward yourself. And maybe you need that mercy more than more effort. Not more effort to look secure. Not more effort to sound secure. Mercy to stop punishing yourself every time you are imperfectly perceived. Because the truth is, being imperfectly perceived is part of being alive. You cannot escape it completely. You cannot outgrow it entirely. You cannot become so wise, so careful, so clear, so disciplined that nobody will ever misunderstand you again. So the answer was never total control. The answer is inner non-dependence. To live without making your emotional survival depend on perfect recognition. To live without turning every external response into an internal sentence. To live without placing your identity in the hands of unstable minds. That is peace. Not because it removes pain, but because it stops multiplying pain. If this reflection has been walking beside something you have been carrying quietly, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And if one line stayed with you, write it in the comments. Sometimes a sentence remembered at the right moment can keep you from falling back into an old habit. Because the old habit will still whisper. It will whisper when someone fails to answer the way you hoped. It will whisper when your value feels unseen. It will whisper when you feel reduced, dismissed, or underestimated. It will whisper, explain more, prove more, show them, fix it, control it. And in that moment, your real work begins. Not dramatic work. Quiet work. The work of pausing. The work of breathing before reacting. The work of letting discomfort exist without turning it into identity. The work of remembering, this moment does not decide who I am. The work of choosing dignity over urgency. The work of protecting your peace without needing to perform coldness. The work of standing still inside yourself while the world remains noisy. This is how insecurity loses power. Not in one victory. In many small refusals. Every time you refuse to over-explain from fear, you grow. Every time you let a misunderstanding pass without collapsing, you grow. Every time you stop asking for permission to trust your own value, you grow. Every time you choose calm over performance, you grow. Every time you return to what is actually yours, you grow. And one day, almost quietly, you notice something has changed. The same things still happen, but they no longer enter you the same way. You no longer feel the same desperation to be seen correctly by everyone. You no longer panic when approval is delayed. You no longer chase respect with nervous energy. You no longer feel that every moment of friction threatens your identity. You are still human. Still sensitive. Still imperfect. Still capable of pain. But no longer so available to disturbance. That is a beautiful kind of transformation, because it is not loud. It does not need to announce itself. It is not a performance of confidence. It is something deeper. A settledness. A steadiness. A return to inner authority. And that return is what this whole reflection has been pointing toward. The detail that gives away insecurity is not only in how you speak or react. It is in the hidden belief that your worth must be protected through constant management of other people's perception. Once that belief begins to dissolve, your life begins to open. You breathe differently. You speak differently. You let things pass that once would have consumed you. You stop standing before the world with your hands full of proof. And you finally understand something simple, but life-changing. You do not become strong by making everyone see your value. You become strong by no longer abandoning your peace whenever someone fails to. So perhaps the real goal was never to control how you appear in the eyes of others. Perhaps the real goal is to become so inwardly clear that even when the world looks at you through distortion, you do not lose sight of yourself. And maybe the true power was never in controlling everything that happens around you, but in learning, moment by moment, to control the way you respond within. That is where dignity lives. That is where peace begins. And that is where insecurity, little by little, loses its voice. Until one day, what once exposed your fear no longer exists. Only silence. Only clarity. Only the calm of someone who no longer needs the world's permission to remain whole.